Hello, everyone. Welcome to this meeting, this interactive meeting. My name is Karen Howard. I'm joined by two of my colleagues, Erin Arango Escalante, and if she would just raise her hand, and Jennifer will also be on a little bit later. I'm not sure she's on quite yet.
I'm here.
Oh, excellent, excellent. So this is your support team, so you probably have seen our faces before. We want to welcome you to this webinar. We are so fortunate to have Leo here, Kim Trent, who is the Deputy Director for Prosperity, and Denise Flannery, who will go over everything Michigan Impact Grant. But before they do, we wanted to talk a little bit about BUILD. Next slide, please. So as we've done before, the BUILD initiative is 20 years old. It is a national nonprofit. It envisions a day when race, ethnicity, zip code, language, immigration status no longer determine outcomes. And it does that by working with state leaders to really reform and construct early childhood systems, by embedding racial equity within early childhood systems, by helping the Pritzker Children's Initiatives coalitions, which are in 20 states and 10 communities, which are making good policy for children and families, and for working with grantees like yourselves of the Kellogg Foundation. Next slide. So with generous funding from the Kellogg Foundation, my colleagues and I have been working with nonprofits like you to really access ARPA and pandemic funding. And we do that by hosting meetings like this one, by researching and highlighting funding opportunities. And we hope to do that with Leo in greater detail, by connecting nonprofits to national organizations that can also provide assistance, and providing advocacy support to you and to other coalitions and policy leaders. Next slide, please. So what will we be talking about today? We're going to provide an overview, or Leo is going to provide an overview of all things Michigan Impact Grant, everything from the application to eligibility, impact areas, performance measures, the whole kit and caboodle. And this is your chance really to ask them all the questions that you've been wanting to ask them. We've made this meeting a meeting, so it's interactive, so that you can come off of mute and ask questions at the appropriate time, and so that there can be a dialogue and a back and forth. Leo will also be talking about the Community Centers Grant. That's a grant that will be coming out in soon to be released, so they'll preview that, and we hope once it is released, they might come back and do a similar meeting with us. And then finally, we want to talk a little bit about the supports that we can provide with respect to this grant, as well as future grants. Next slide, please. So I am so fortunate to introduce to you Kim Trent, Deputy Director for Prosperity at LEO, the Michigan Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity. I'm going to read a little bit about her bio. It's a long bio, so you'll see it on the website. She's charged with guiding and building support for efforts to boost the economic security of Michigan citizens and residents through strategic initiatives, programming, and partnerships. Her portfolio and leadership duties include in-state government includes serving as the key staffer to the Michigan Poverty Task Force.
I was going to say, Karen, that's a great place to end.
Okay, I'll end there.
You'll be here all day reading that ridiculously long bio. I know I keep making a mental note to go back in and cut that thing down a bit.
It's all good. She has an illustrious career.
But I think that's the most important information is that, I have a large portfolio here at Leo, but certainly what attracted me to the job in the first place is being able to serve as the key staffer to the Michigan Poverty Task Force. So, the Poverty Task Force is the reason that we have these nonprofit grants that you'll be hearing a little bit about today. And it's kind of our centering. When we speak about prosperity, to me, that's the center of our prosperity work, because we desperately want to lower Michigan's poverty rate. Everything that we do is about boosting prosperity here in our state, and certainly being intentional about policy involving people who are struggling is, at the heart of everything that we do here in the prosperity team. So thank you very much for the introduction. I don't know if you were going to also introduce the duties, but I'd be happy to do so when I think I'm responsible for the first slide, and I'd be happy to turn things over to her.
That sounds great. Yes, I just want to
Okay.
add that when I reached out to Leo, I want to really lift up, thank you so much, Director, because immediately you got back to us and said, absolutely. So you have a heart for nonprofits in the community, and Leo does as well, and we certainly appreciate that. So
Thank
I'll
you
leave
so
it.
much. No, it was my pleasure. And this is, so much of what I do is about making sure that the people who are on the ground, who are doing the work every day, who will do the work whether government is here or not, are aware of the things that we're doing so that we can be here for you. We think it's really important that we work collaboratively with those nonprofit entities that do the work every day. And we're very grateful for them and for you there at Build for everything that you're doing to boost their ability to deliver for their constituents. So thank you.
Thank you.
Um,
Next slide, I think.
yeah, next slide. Let's do one more. So again, I talked a little bit about the Michigan Poverty Task Force, and it was a body that was convened by Governor Whitmer in December of 2019. And I started this new role as Deputy Director of Prosperity in January of 2020. It's 14 state department directors who sit at a table, really designed to boost collaboration. I mean, we know that in the past, there may have been this idea that poverty, any issue involving poverty was the province of, say, our department, the Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity, and DHHS, Department of Health and Human Services, and everyone else was just kind of a secondary or ancillary. And we really decided that every department of state government has a role in helping to address the causes of poverty, helping to come up with solutions and to do it collaboratively. And so that was the idea of establishing the Poverty Task Force. Since then, we have issued 2 reports with policy recommendations. We looked very closely at our benefit system here in the state of Michigan. We are in the process of having a report that's being produced by the University of Kansas that does a deep dive into how we deploy our TANF dollars. So we're trying to be very intentional. We're working very closely with stakeholders. The idea is the long game. We very much want not just to knock down barriers that exist today, but to remove them so that we can address those, long-standing causes of poverty, all those economic inequities that exist, really looking at everything through an equity lens, recognizing, the role that isms play in, how poverty is animated here in our state. And so, through the work of the Poverty Task Force, we are trying to be multidimensional. Obviously, there's a lot of work that happens within state government, but as I mentioned, the work with stakeholders, and that's really how we came to. And the one thing I didn't mention is that our goal is, the frame that we use is the ALICE rate. So, obviously, that's a term that was created by the United Way, asset limited, income constrained, and employed. So, essentially, the working poor, people who go to work every day and are still not able to make ends meet for their family. So, our goal is, while we certainly believe, we want to work with people below the ALICE rate, people who below the ALICE threshold. We recognize, we're not just looking at people who are struggling. We're looking also at people who are just not making it at all, who are really who don't have the help that they need. But certainly, we think it's important to also include those who are struggling. If you can't pay the bills, that's a very stressful life. It's a toxic way to live. Often, we looked at the connections between wealth inequities and health, disparities. And so we are really trying to be intentional in looking at all of these causes and solutions in a really kind of multidimensional way. And so to that end, we have launched a series of nonprofit grants that you'll hear a little bit about, using money from the American Rescue Plan Act, knowing that we have a unique opportunity because of those dollars flowing to the state that we wanted to give the nonprofit sector a boost. In addition to the programming that we're doing within state government, because you are valued partners for us. And so we had one round that I think Denise is going to talk to you about that has already launched. And we have these two other opportunities that you'll hear about today. And so with that, I would like to turn this program over to a person I was very proud to give responsibility for this project to, because she is very knowledgeable about state government, has a really deep history of both legislative work. So she understands, what happens at the state capitol, as well as what happens in our departments. She's worked in a few departments here in state government, and really understands a lot of times when we're talking about programs like this, it's the paperwork that ends up kind of tripping people up. And this is a person who really helped us to design a program that is, where we are trying to remove barriers so that particularly in the first round, when we worked very closely with the Michigan Nonprofit Association, we wanted to make the application process as smooth as possible. And I think that certainly for this round as well, I mean, there are federal government requirements and that will kind of frame what we're able to do. It's not as if we can just pass out checks. There will be checks and balances, of course, but using her experience in state government, I think has really been a boon to me and to the Prosperity Division as we have tried to pull together these nonprofit grant opportunities. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Denise Flannery, who will tell you a little bit more about the two opportunities we're talking about today. Denise.
Thank you, Kim. And paperwork is the operative word when we talk about the funding source for this, which is so funding for these grants come from the federal government and through ARPA, and they're intended to aid nonprofits who face challenges during the pandemic. And so the state of Michigan was awarded, or we carved out $50 million to support nonprofits. And like Kim mentioned, we divvied those funds up into two separate pots. And so $35 million of that went to the Michigan Nonprofit Relief Fund. And that was specifically to support generally the smaller nonprofits themselves who saw a decrease in revenue and increased costs due to the pandemic. And then we set aside $15 million for these impact grants to help and ask these nonprofits to partner with us to help move forward some of the recommendations of the Poverty Task Force that Kim mentioned. And then also, to use this to better assist those people that they work with on a day-to-day basis. So next slide. So we did start out by issuing a request for information, and that was back in the spring, and that closed on April 21st. And so the purpose of that was to get a scan of the available programming to help support the grant funding and determine the grant amount. And so we got a robust response of 145 interested organizations. And it did help us to kind of validate the impact areas that we had outlined, and also to set that grant funding amount. And so some of the questions that came out of that RFI process as we transitioned to the RFP was we had organizations reach out and ask, if we submitted an application for the RFI, do we still need to submit an RFP? And the answer is yes. If you did submit an RFI, that was for us for kind of informational purposes to find out what was out there, what to support the work that we wanted to do. And so you do need to submit an RFP. And then also people also were wondering if they did submit under one issue area, if they could change it and submit for a separate project. And yes, that is allowed. You did, and you did not have to submit an RFI to be eligible for the RFP. Next slide. Okay. So the applications for the RFP are due by noon on the 23rd. And so we know that the timing is a little, for those who might have applied for the relief fund, you probably will not know if you've received funding through the relief fund by June 23rd. And we know people have wanted to apply for both the relief fund and the impact grants. And so we suggest that if you have applied for both and you find out that you were funded for the relief fund, that you can accept those funds. And then once we determine and choose the grantees for the impact grant, if your organization is chosen, then there will be a process where you can return the nonprofit relief fund dollars to the Michigan Nonprofit Association. And we are using eGrams for our grant management system. And we did host a webinar with the eGrams team last week, and that is currently on our website if you have questions on any technical aspects of using the eGrams system. Next slide. So for the grant eligibility, I know that there's been some questions around that, but so applicants must be a 501c3 or a 501c19 to apply for the grant and to qualify for the grant. I know we've had some organizations that are in general tax exempt, but you do need to be a 501c3 or C19 officially operating and registered as a 501c3 or C19 and operating in the state of Michigan prior to January 1, 2019. And I know that there's also been questions because we've talked about the impact grant being for larger nonprofits, and we don't have a specific operating budget threshold in mind, but you must be able to demonstrate the organizational capacity to manage the funds and carry out all of the deliverables. We've also had some questions around capital expenditures, and they are not eligible expenditures for the impact grant, but there will be a grant opportunity coming out later this summer, and for community centers, and I do have a slide later in the presentation to just kind of touch on that opportunity. Next slide. And so just to kind of quickly go over some of the impact areas. So one is to improve participants' transition to self-sufficiency, and that can be accomplished in a couple different ways. They can be through cash assistance programs, food, and other wraparound services. They need to be proportional to the negative impact. So with these funds, and you will see there's a question in the application about how is this reasonable and to the harm caused by the pandemic. And so there's also providing services for those without bank accounts or for those who are underbanked. And so we know that 6% of Michigan's population does not have a bank account, and they're spending as much as 10% of their income on fees to access their money. You can also provide assistance to the unemployed or underemployed workers through job training, subsidized employment, or other employment supports. So this could be for, you know, a whole host of people. It could be for returning citizens. It could be, it could also tie in with the next one, which is expanding services to foster youth and families involved in the child welfare system. And that can be accomplished through financial assistance, education, housing, and again, other wraparound services. So next slide. And then we have supporting strong and healthy communities that promote health and safety. And so many of these link back to social determinants of health, which was a focus of our 2022 Poverty Task Force report that really shows that where a person lives, work, and play can really affect their health and well-being. And then lastly, this funding can be used to address a variety of mental health services. Next slide. Performance measures. So these are just some of the anticipated performance measures. There will be others that we will add depending on the performance depending on the programs that are selected. And then we do have FAQs that are up on our website that can that answer some questions that we've had about these specific performance measures. Next slide. So the grantee will be responsible for participating in scheduled check-ins. Typically, we have those on a monthly basis, and submitting monthly narrative progress reports and monthly financial reports to Leo. And we would provide templates for these. And then programs using the federal, state, and local, I always trip over this, SLFRF, state and local federal relief funds are required to report on a quarterly basis on expenditures and programmatic data. And so we would work with each of the grantees to gather that information. And again, templates are provided. And so all of the nonprofits that are funded would have to comply with these SLFRF reporting requirements. Next slide. And so, as I mentioned, there will be funding available for community centers later this summer. And there is a total of $60 million available, and half of the funding will need to go to communities that are below the average median income. And so again, that will be available later this summer, but the community center grants does allow for capital expenditures. So people who want to buy land, renovate a community center, or build a community center could use these grant dollars for those purposes. And it will be grants up to $2.5 million. And then they must offer one of the following services that is listed on here. So, and then next slide, I think that's our last. Yes, so if there's any questions after this webinar, feel free to email us at the Poverty Task Force email. And if you have questions on eGrams or eGAMS, as I put in that slide, sorry, that's Joseph's email, and he has been extremely responsive to people who have reached out with any questions.
You're on mute, Karen.
Denise, thank you so much. That was a great overview. I want to invite folks, I know there's a number of questions in the chat. So I want to invite my folks, if you want to come off mute and ask your questions, you can do so now. We will also be going through those questions in the chat. And so the floor is open. If folks want to raise their hand, we will call upon you to ask your questions. Great, we have a question here from Kimberly. Kimberly, please come off mute and ask your question.
I did put my questions in the chat, but I'll ask them now. So I have I have two questions about the impact grant. So I know we can include salaries, but is there a limit to how much we can include for salaries? And I know there's a 7.5% administrative, but is there like salaries for program staff? How much can we use?
There is not a limit on the amount of funding you can use towards salaries in fringe. Of course, we would want to see the bulk of the programming going to, or the bulk of the funding going to actual programming, but there is not a cap on that.
Yeah, like for example, we want to include program staff, but also we have like for the mental health aspect of the grant, like if we want to hire a, help pay for psychiatrist or therapist. Is that applicable?
Yes, that is allowable. And
Okay.
can be kind of, directed back to the services that you are providing.
Okay. And then my other question was about food. No, so entertainment costs aren't allowed, but can we, like, for example, feed youth after school and during the summer, like feed them meals? Or is this for food? Is this just like a box of groceries?
You would be able to provide meals for youth after school. That would be allowable.
And then I have a question about the community centers funding. Now we are a health clinic, but also kind of a community center in a way. So we do have community use of our space and, youth education programs, as well as health as a health clinic. Would we be eligible for that? Or does community center specifically have to be in our name?
I don't think so. And I am not, I'm kind of assisting with that grant, but I'm looking, so it's in the boilerplate for that specific grant is very specific. And so I can provide the language for that to Karen, and I don't know if you can send it in a follow-up email, or if people know, if you go to Michigan Legislature .com or .org, it was in House Bill 4016, Section 705, and it really spells out everything for that grant funding. One of the stipulations around that is that the center has to be free and open to the public and the community that it serves.
Okay, thank you.
I think it's amazing you knew the provision, Denise. So Kim was quite right that it resides in your mind, a lot of information.
Well, listen, I have cheat sheets. So I had copied in some of the boilerplate and I put the House bill on there just because then I was constantly going and looking it up. So just to save myself time.
Excellent. We have a question, I think, from Robert. Hi, Robert.
Hello, everyone. I just wanted to get some clarification around how much money is going to be made available for the community centers. I know I heard $60 million and then I heard half of it. Can you clarify that exactly how much money is going to be made available here, within Michigan for this effort?
Sure, it's 60 million in total. And so half of it, which would be 30 million, would have to go towards those communities that are providing services to people who are below the average median income.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Erin, are there questions in the queue?
There are. I was just going to get to those, and I'll just say, feel free at any point to come off mute if that is easier for you, or put them in the chat box. There are a few more in the chat box, and then we also had questions that we asked during registration, so I'll ask those as well. So the first question is regarding reporting. Can you share more about what type of information is requested during the monthly reporting, both narrative and financial?
Sure. So our monthly, and so I don't anticipate this would change very much, but I think it's pretty standard. It asks, for a description of the work accomplished for that month, the work to be accomplished for the following month. We ask for any success stories. We ask people to report if there are any delays or issues that have come up, if there's been any deviation from the work plan. And then on that, we ask for monthly reporting on performance measures. So that's where you would also report out your performance measures both for that month and then cumulative. And then we also ask for a financial accounting of just what has been spent in that month by line item.
Great, thank you. Is there a matching requirement for the impact grants?
There is not a requirement. Of course, we always like to see some in-kind resources being dedicated, but it's not required.
Thank you. Can you please provide some examples of the types of cash assistance programs that would be eligible?
Sure. And Kim, do you feel comfortable talking about this one, about cash assistance programs that would be acceptable?
I think that, I mean, Denise, you probably have a better sense than I do about what kind, but I think that what we were thinking is, well, I'll let you answer and then if I can fill in gaps if there are any.
Yeah, so it wouldn't necessarily be like a universal income, but something along that lines of a set amount of money each week, because, and Kim is much better on the policy side of this, because I think it's been shown that when families who are struggling do receive a guaranteed amount per month, that they do use that kind of for the benefit of the household. So that is kind of what we were thinking.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, just given what I think that the evidence has just kind of demonstrated after the child tax credit and other opportunities that we had during COVID, where we could see that a lot of the myths that have kind of emerged from the welfare, when we had so-called welfare reform, and there was kind of a vilification of the poor, and people, a distrust that was very prevalent in policy conversations. I think a lot of that was disproven when we saw people who got money from the child tax credit who used that money to invest in their families, who spend it for exactly the, obviously, anytime you have government spending, you're going to have some people who are going to take advantage of that. That's not just with poor people. We've seen plenty of people who are very well off who misuse governmental dollars, but unfortunately there has been a narrative that has emerged, and so we think that to kind of extend that argument to help demonstrate the value of a cash benefit, we think that is something that with this grant is certainly something that could be explored, whether in the more creativity, the more that, it's something that is kind of a, evidence-based program that we and you and, stakeholders can use as evidence that this is an approach that is worth pursuing or thinking about. I think are the kind of programs that we're looking for with the impact grant.
And so, Kim, if I can just interject, child savings accounts would fall under that. Cash transfers to youth who are aging out of foster care. Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I was going to ask, can it also include an evaluation of those programs so that we debunk all the things that you've been talking about, right? The vilification of the poor.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank
you.
Both of those are great examples of, and the state has really kind of doubled down on our commitment to children's savings accounts, even outside of this program. So, that's something that we, through the Poverty Task Force, have really been very interested in supporting.
Excellent.
And there might be some other innovative ideas out there, and that's really what we're kind of looking for. A lot of nonprofits know where their community sit and what might be, a best way to help lift those people who are struggling in their community. And so we do, we're looking forward to seeing some innovative ideas through the impact grants.
Wonderful, thank you. It looks like we have a person with their hand raised. Feel free to come off mute.
Yeah, thank you so much for answering that question. That's really helpful. I was mostly interested in, our organization, the kind of cash assistance we're exploring doing that this kind of funding could help us get into. We support clients legally who are being impacted by fines and fees and warrants and all kinds of, monetary restrictions that prevent them from participating in the economy in some way. And so the kind of cash assistance we're thinking about implementing would be more to pay those things off, so the money wouldn't be going directly into their hands necessarily. I think a lot of the examples you gave were really great. And so I just want to make sure that in our case where, you know, the funds would be dedicated to pay off some of these things, to get these roadblocks out of their way, that would still be eligible, even though it's not going directly into their pockets.
That
Yeah,
would definitely be an eligible use.
absolutely.
Thank you so much for confirming.
And I also wanted to say, and I don't know if it's a question that anybody has, and I know Karen raised this in a pre-meeting that we had earlier this week, that there's been questions about the scoring rubric, and that is available through, that's an updated on the FAQ that's on the website. It hasn't been updated yet. Our web person has been out, but that should be updated hopefully within the next couple of days. So please check back and look at the FAQ if you're interested in the scoring rubric.
It says it on the website that it was updated yesterday.
Oh,
I don't know if that's true, but that's what it says.
And just so folks know, there are a number of links in that chat box, one of which is to the FAQ. Also, the e-grams recorded webinar is there, and then the House bill that Denise referenced as well. So the FAQ link was just posted again.
yeah, and thank you. Is it Jennifer? Yes, it was updated. So I had gotten a bounce back that our web person was out yesterday, but I'm happy to see that it is updated. So the scoring rubric is available online right now.
Wonderful.
Hi.
How to... Sorry, Vanessa, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Hi, yeah, Vanessa Green here. I have a question about the cash assistance, and one of the areas could it be related to supporting people with college assistance, or particular trade programs, or not necessarily scholarships, but books, or parents who may need to go to school, who may need to, pay extra for daycare and those kinds of things. Would that be a qualifying?
So I think some of that, like books and materials, could be looked at as kind of wraparound services.
Okay.
And but college credits probably would not be allowed.
Mhm.
And Kim, I saw you came off mute. I don't know if you have anything to
Yeah,
add to
I mean,
that.
I think that, certainly we here at Leo, part of our portfolio in prosperity is the Governor's 60 by 30 initiative, which is designed to help 60% of working adults in Michigan to get a post-secondary credential. And in that work, we really focus a lot on wraparound services for, students who are pursuing either, higher education or certificate, high value certificates or other credentials. Because I'm a former university board member, and I know that as much money as we invest in trying to make college more affordable, there are a lot of other barriers that exist that prevent people from being able to complete. So, I think that your question is a good one. Certainly, we recognize the value of wraparound services for that population, whether they're pursuing it, and it also helps our goal because again, we're trying to get to 60% of Michiganders. In that we do have state dollars that have been allocated to community colleges in the state for wraparound services. But certainly we could entertain other ideas if you have a novel approach for that, that would not be disqualifying.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Great, a few other questions are coming in. May our applications go towards supporting multiple program areas, or does all of the funding have to go towards one idea or program?
No, organizations could support multiple impact areas.
Okay. Would dispersing down payment assistance funds be allowed?
That would not be allowed because MISTA has received SLFRF dollars as well and used those dollars for down payment assistance programs. And so we can't duplicate programs and services or replicate anything. So that would not be allowed.
And recognizing that there is the scoring rubric on the FAQ, are there bonus points in the scoring rubric for addressing multiple program areas?
No.
Okay. So there are more questions that have come in as well during registration for the webinar that I want to make sure to get to as well. And we can always go back and forth. Okay. Here are the questions that came in during registration. Can economic wealth building work qualify for this grant opportunity?
So that's, I'm wondering if there's a specific example, if that would be like CSAs or
Yeah, I think if the person just wants to, if they want to add any more, maybe their question was answered, but if there's anything else they want to add, they can feel free to put it in the chat box and we can come back to it. Absolutely. And this might be for Joseph, but perhaps we could have a little bit of information if you feel comfortable, or we can contact Joseph. And it's really, how do you start an application in eGrams? Is there a couple of like tips and tricks that you have for just starting?
Yes, and I can put it into the chat to get started, and then on how to enter your application. So I'll drop that in the chat right now.
Oh, wow.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Great.
All right, thank you. So you talked about some of the reporting requirements of the grant in terms of the reporting. Are there other reporting requirements?
So aside from the monthly narrative reports, there are the quarterly reports, and because we are just starting the grant, I've not been through the cycle yet for the quarterly reports that are required through FRF funding. But that's all I know of right now. But sometimes they surprise me with some new reporting requirements or forms to fill out. But I think that that's all that would come down to the grantee level.
Okay, thank you. What are the financial requirements of this grant, and how can the grant funds be used? Wondering if that's a question that's part of in the FAQ, if that would be a helpful space. What are your thoughts?
Yes. So, I mean, the financial requirements, and maybe that's getting towards the question about what we consider a large nonprofit, because we've talked about the relief fund being for smaller nonprofits, generally with an operating budget of under 1 million. And then we've talked about the impact grant as being for larger nonprofits. But so we really don't have a number in mind. It's not like, oh, you have to have at least $500,000 in operating to qualify for this. We just want to see that you have the experience in managing these types of grants, and that's really addressed in the application system about showing an example of when the organization has managed grants of this size.
Great.
And then if for eligible expenditures, if they go to the opportunities for my nonprofit website, there is a copy of the grant in kind of more standard RFP type format that people can look through before they go onto the eGram system. And I really recommend people look at that version of it prior to getting onto eGrams.
A helpful tip, thank you. So in this situation, this is a public law firm, and the majority of services are conducted through staff. They're not a program. Are they eligible to apply?
So I guess I'm assuming that they are a 501c3. And so, I mean, it sounds like, I mean, would it be all staff dollars? Is that what they want to use the grant for, to pay for staffing to provide the legal services?
That's our assumption.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't think the purpose of the grant is to kind of, is it supplant the dollars, like typical salaries for work that you are doing. We really want to see an innovative approach at expanding your current program or your current offerings. And so just, switching those dollars to use the grant funds to pay for salaries. I wouldn't think that would be a good use of the funding.
So essentially, be careful of the supplementing, the focus on supplementing, not supplanting.
Yes.
Sorry, Karen.
No, I was just going to say, if they're providing additional services, legal services to Alice population, would that be the product that you could use the money for, or no?
Yes, I think to expand programming would be an appropriate use of the dollars to support people within the Alice population.
Okay.
But it's also to keep in the back of your mind that it always kind of has to link back. These dollars were given because of the pandemic, and how in building that case of how this response links back to harm from the pandemic.
Got it.
Are these funds restricted to a particular geographical area?
No.
What does partnership with Michigan Works entail?
I think that they might be confusing this with a grant that was just issued by the Workforce Development Agency. And so that is for removal of barriers. And I think that the requirement for that grant is that people have to work through a Michigan Works agency as maybe their fiscal sponsor. So I think this might be what they're referring to, but through this grant, you don't have to work with a Michigan Works agency. Denise,
where would they go to get some more information about, I think it's called BREEZE, B-R-E-S grant, barriers to employment. Where would they get some more information about that opportunity?
Let me put that in the chat.
Excellent.
As you're putting that in the chat, I'll just read another comment in the chat. Although this person didn't ask the question about wealth building, they noted the access to neighborhood-based entrepreneurial support is explicitly noted as an example in an earlier slide. So I've interpreted that supporting neighborhood-based worker-owned business support versus traditional single entrepreneur support, that this would be an acceptable program to apply for.
Let me.
And Karen, if you'd like to come off of mute and add any additional information, that would be great.
Sure. So this is, we work in wealth building in Detroit, and we work with groups of individuals, and usually they are low income, trying to figure out how to do something they've been doing collectively, but provide a way so they can increase their income by showing them ways of doing it together. And this, in many cases, could be worker owned, higher wages, blah, blah, blah. But you don't see that language in many things. You see entrepreneurial support. Well, it's sort of the same thing, except for instead of one person making a business, it is a group of people making a business. So I just want to see if that that's too far outside the lines for this one?
Yeah, that would be allowable under the grant, as long as the organization is a 501c3. I don't, Kim, do you see any concerns with the entrepreneurial supports?
No.
And thank you for putting in that, the link. It was taking me a couple minutes to get there.
Right. Yes, there's a lot of great links in the chat box. I'm sorry,
And-
Karen.
Oh, perfect. I would like to recommend also, if people haven't already signed up for the Michigan Poverty Task Force newsletter, to go to our website. And if you scroll to the bottom, you can sign up for our newsletter, because we do promote other funding opportunities. So when the community center RFP is put out there, we will definitely promote that.
So I have a question. You mentioned that the community center RFP, that the maximum budget for that is 60 million. So for this one, is like the grant proposals can be in the amount of 1 million to 2 million. So what is the maximum amount, and like how many proposals will you be approving?
For the impact grant,
Yes.
yeah, the maximum amount is 2 million. We don't have a number in mind. We just are kind of taking a wait and see what proposals come in, what gets scored the highest, and then we'll be making the decisions from there. But I mean, it could be anywhere from, I guess, 7 to 14.
So the maximum amount to submit in the proposal then would be up to 2 million.
Yes.
For each proposal. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, and
And
I
then
don't
is-
think,
Oh, go ahead.
yeah, it's between 1 and 2 million, and eGrams won't let you ask for less than 1 million or more than 2 million.
Vanessa, were you also referencing the community center grant?
No, I was just basically indicating that the maximum that you indicated for that grant was 60 million. So I was just wondering if there's a maximum for the impact grant as well.
Oh, yeah, we
No.
have 15
No.
million dedicated to the impact grant.
Okay.
Yeah, that $60 million figure is how much is available total. So yeah, I don't think we've determined yet the maximum amount for the community center grant.
It's 2.5 million.
Oh, 2.5 is what we
Yeah,
landed
it's
on?
in the
Okay.
boilerplate.
Oh, got it.
But-
Okay.
Do we know when it's going to be released, about when?
Yes, we're aiming for it by the end of this month.
Okay, great.
Mhm.
And so folks that have, we've got a few more minutes. We want to talk a little bit about the supports that Bill can provide, but I want to give just the opportunity if folks have any last questions, final questions for both Kim and Denise. You can put them in the chat, or you can come off mute. Couple people saying how helpful it is, so thank you. I did just have one other question because it came in through another source. And can proposals that address transportation as a barrier that families face when accessing health services or other needed services, would that be part of this grant? Assistance.
Yes, yep.
Excellent, excellent, great. Well, thank you. Any additional questions? We are happy to send questions to both Kim and Denise. I know there's also an email link or a line which you can ask questions as well as you think through your proposals. But I really want to thank them for coming and for discussing this grant opportunity, for educating us on future grant opportunities, and being just so accessible to this group. So Kim and Denise, thank you so much. And now I'm going to ask if we put back up the PowerPoint so that we can quickly just talk about some of the supports that Bill can provide. So, through funding from the Kellogg Foundation, we're here to support grantees in Battle Creek, Grand Rapids and Detroit. And because this grant is such a large grant, we cannot do grant writing, but what we can offer is assistance in determining eligibility, conducting research, if there are data points that you need to track down to really align the pandemic or consequences of the pandemic with some of your proposals and what you might want to put in your proposal. We can certainly help with that. We can provide thought leadership. We can review proposals and offer suggestions. And we can obviously serve as a conduit to get questions answered quickly and to share information. The moment it comes out from Leo, I think we're on it. We're really wanting to disperse that information more broadly. So those are the supports that we can provide. Next slide, please. And so this is me and my colleagues that you see on this meeting. Emailing any one of us pretty much gets you to all of us, and we often do things together so that we can provide the kind of support where one might be busy, others are not, and so we sort of tag team this. So please reach out to us if you want any assistance. And with that, we can end this meeting, but again, I want to thank Director Trent and Denise. Thank you so much for the partnership and for your commitment to the communities throughout Michigan and to the nonprofit sector. So
Thank you for giving us the opportunity.
great, thanks. With that, we'll say goodbye, everyone. We will send this recording out to folks. And again, as more information becomes available, we will feed that out as well. Thank you so much.